Now, let's focus on this issue, and it's the unemployment figures that were released yesterday. They show the official jobless rate has increased just under 8 million people now officially out of work. Now, these are just people who want to work, not people who've already given up. 8 million people who just cannot get a job. And it seems that domestic workers are particularly at risk. 67,000 jobs in that sector shed in the first 3 months of this year. Let's discuss this now with Zwelinzima Vavi. He's the General-Secretary of SAFTU, that's the South African Federation of Trade Unions. Zwelinzima, thank you so much for joining us. Are these job losses purely because the middle class is feeling the pinch, that essentially people who can normally afford to get some help in the house or around the garden are looking at their budgets and going, we just can't afford it anymore, we're going to have to do the housework ourselves?
I think that's the central reason, Sally. There can be other factors. The economy is on a slow growth path and is trapped into a zigzagging between 1 or 2% at best, and or on below 0% growth, and that's a big factor. But the factor that you are mentioning is actually the factor affecting the middle class. Look, there is a combination of issues here that are combining to make the life hell for everybody, but particularly the poorest of the poor, the working poor, and the middle class not saved. The middle class is now in serious debt, just like all workers in South Africa. And if you look at the study that was done by the FNB, they told us that the upper middle classes are spending 80% of their income in 5 days. It's finished. And what then happens is they live through borrowing in order to see the month out. That's a terrible circumstance. That's the first thing. What causes that is the factors such as the interest rates. It's hitting the middle class and the workers alike the same. That the interest rates have increased by over 21% since the so-called normalization started in November of 2021 is a massive factor in the economy.
And we're not likely to see the end of that. Sorry to interject, Zwelinzima, but we actually also know we were hoping that maybe with one more interest rate hike, we might be at the top of the cycle and it would start to go down. But with the rand in such dire straits now, we're being told that it's very likely it'll be a 50% basis point increase. That'll be due coming in, I think, next week. And there may be more to come. So surely this is just going to get worse and worse.
Worse and worse, because it's not just the interest rates that is a factor. We're already at 10.75 paying to the commercial banks, but it is also the electricity prices that increased by 18, close to 19% on the 1st of April. Overall, since the crisis of electricity started in South Africa in 2007, we've paid 800% increase in the electricity tariffs. It is the price of food that is hovering around 14% every year. It is the price of transport. And more government allowed the destruction of the railway system in Johannesburg, or Gauteng, and the Western Cape, the more workers found themselves being forced to use the private transport. And now, as we speak, 80% of workers are using private transport to go to work, and it's more expensive, it's more unreliable, and it is more unsafe. And there's just everything just not going our way. From the middle strata to the lowest of the lowest, things are very, very difficult. Now you see the figures. What that means is that middle class can't afford domestic workers anymore. 67,000 at the beginning of this quarter. But if you look at it back, we lost 250,000 domestic workers at the beginning of the COVID crisis. We have not recovered those numbers 3 years down the line. We're hovering at about in total 200,000 jobs that have been lost in the domestic worker sector since the beginning of COVID. This is bad news for the economy.
Yeah, it's really bad news indeed. There was an above-inflation wage hike from March this year, 9.6% increase as a minimum wage for domestic workers. And, you know, we've long known that domestic workers are often underpaid. So this is like welcome news on the one hand, but on the other, I wonder if this might have also made matters worse for some employers saying, well, I can't afford that, so I better let this person go. I mean, it seems that even when one tries to do the right thing, it is very, very difficult. I mean, where are we going? What solutions do you see?
We're moving towards what we've always warned about, Sally, a ticking time bomb.
Right, yeah.
It's about 12 million now of people who are hovering this. It's actually 9.2 million of young people who are not in any form of employment, education, or training. That's a disaster for anybody. So we continue to call for an economic program that will be pro-poor. We are opposed to this prioritization of inflation targeting at the expense of creating jobs and growing the economy, or distribution of wealth from the rich, from the rich to the poor. We continue to call for reindustrialization of South Africa by expanding ownership by workers, by South Africans, of our mineral resources, land, and major manufacturing sectors. We will continue to champion for a government to do something about the price of food in South Africa. And there's no focused food programs in the country to address the food security. Most of the land is lying unused in most parts of the Eastern Cape and Northwest, and yet we are told that that land is the second richest in the world. There is no specific programs to encourage people to use even the small gardens to produce their own food. Until we have those programs, we continue going to see more people desperately look at the statistics that tells us that 70% of our people who are earning below 5,800 rands are now in a desperate situation, and that the statistics further tells us that the situation of food security is becoming a massive challenge in South Africa. At some point, there were 14 million people going to bed without anything to eat, not because they want to slim and become thinner, no, because they simply cannot afford a plate of food at the time.
It is a tragic state of affairs, and you know, talking about using the land and even allowing space for people to have a little subsistence farm or even just a small square of land so that when times are hard they can supplement with their own produce. But also you're making the point about, you know, value-added tax. We need to increase that basket of goods that don't have that extra tax, because very poor South Africans simply cannot afford. If even the middle class is feeling the pinch, the very poor are in a dire situation indeed. Thank you so much, Zwelinzima Vavi of SAFTU.